Welcome, everyone, to another session of deep dive discussions with people from around the XR industry, particularly in the context of Europe and the ecosystem of European XR. This deep dive discussion is a little more conceptual than some of the others that we've had, but I believe that's because this is a rich topic. I'm really excited to get into it. I think we're going to hear a lot of interesting perspectives, maybe even some polite disagreements on some perspectives. The topic of today is what makes a virtual world European, and obviously unpacking that can come from a lot of different directions. And I'm not going to waste a whole lot of time before we jump right into it. But for those who are listening to us live, either on LinkedIn or on YouTube, you can post your questions, post your comments, your own suggestions in the chat, and we will be able to see those comments in real time. And in the flow of conversation, we're going to address those as best we can. So you can target those to the group, your questions or comments and suggestions, or to individual speakers as well. So without further ado, let me please start off by introducing myself and XR for Europe, who is the organizer of this talk and actually this whole series. So I'm the managing director, Michael Barngrover, of XR for Europe. XR for Europe is a pan-European association representing all manner of practitioner working with XR. Those include researchers, those include developers and creatives, entrepreneurs, and people in the public policy space as well, who are trying collectively to ensure that we have the best development and implementation of these technologies, immersive technologies and extended reality technologies, and doing so in the European context, the continental European context. Um, so this session is part of a series of thought leadership efforts to draw attention to topics that are receiving a lot of attention and a lot of conversation. And so, as I said before, what makes a virtual world European is the subject of today's discussion. So we are joined in no particular order, except the order that it appears in my notes, by five speakers today. The first one I'll introduce is Alina Mikaleva, who is representing Less Media Group. So Alina is a VR producer and a founder of Less Media Group, so which for the last 3 years has been a partnership with Engage XR, one of the leading European metaverse platforms. And doing in that role, she's been running all sorts of corporate, educational, and entertainment events on that platform. That platform is actually a multi-device supporting platform, so not just VR, but it's made its reputation originally in the VR space many years ago. So she's been running virtual events for more than 4 years and is very familiar with all the benefits of virtual collaboration tools and platforms, but also has a lot of firsthand experience of the obstacles to wider adoption of these types of tools. Next, we have Rigmor Barras, who is representing the XR for Human project, along with Rose Marie, who I'll introduce in a moment. Rigmor has a PhD in visual neuroscience and a postdoc in computational neuroscience from the University of Manchester. She is a professor at the University of Southeastern Norway and works on aspects of eye and visual perception, including the understanding its implications for ethical and effective utilization of AR and VR. So she is the co-coordinator of the EU project XR for Human alongside Rose. And Rose Marie Bernabe has a PhD in research ethics and is currently working as a professor of research ethics and research integrity at the University of Oslo, and is an adjunct at the University of Southeastern Norway as well. So her research interests are within the intersection of research ethics, governance, and regulatory science. So this is an area that she applies into the immersive technology space, and specifically does so through the XR for Human project, which is a Horizon Europe project. And again, she's coordinating that project with Rigmor. Then we have Sebastian Kuhn, who is a co-founder and responsible for vision and design at the digital agency Blocks. But they're probably better known for the metaverse platform Realm, which I'm sure we're going to, along with Alina's perspectives on Engage, he's going to be sharing a lot of firsthand experience from running that platform. So he's got an extensive experience in computer graphics, UX and UI design, and particularly in the case of XR, and conceptualizing applications and marketing tools. So at Blocks, he consults with clients and develops individual digital solutions ranging from communication tools and applications to VR and AR. Specifically at ROM, he focuses on product development and the design of that metaverse platform, which has also been around now for several years. So finally, we come to Ana Garcia, who is representing the Openverse project, another Horizon Europe project. But she's also the Secretary General of the Big Data Value Association, whose acronym is BDVA, which is an industry-driven association with more than 250 members in Europe working on AI and data research, and is very much focused on the value creation out of data. So obviously data privacy, data protection are all very much tied into a lot of the discussions around ethics in XR and XR platforms. So she is by education a telecom engineer and has a wide experience working in that sector, particularly in engineering and applied research and technology planning and strategy functions. So in this last decade, though, she has focused mainly on data ecosystems and AI as an ecosystem builder, connecting industry and research to the European policies and supporting implementation of those policies. So the third dimension of her profile is this human-centric approach, which she's been involved in for many years in the development of the Living Lab community, which is she's also the director of the European Network of Living Labs and is a member of the transitional board of MyData. So as I mentioned before, in this specific context of the panel, she's representing the Openverse project, where she leads the ecosystem development and collaborations activities of that project, which aims to establish frameworks for open standards within European metaverse platforms. So that is an awful lot to say about an awful lot of people, and I hope that I did reasonable justice to that. But wherever there was a gap, that's going to come out in the questions as we discuss now this topic. What makes a virtual world European? So the first question that I want to open up with, and again, these questions are for the audience as much as they are for the speakers. But first off, let's just kind of ground the discussion in our own experiences. What are the first experiences you each had with what you'd consider to be a virtual world? Because even defining virtual worlds, I think, is a good activity to start with. So, what would you describe as the culture of those virtual worlds that you first experienced? And I don't want to name somebody off the bat to start with. If anyone is ready and loaded with the response, feel free to jump in.
Okay. We have started doing our work in VR several years back. And to me, it was always VR. And my first the moment that I felt it is a virtual world was the first social moment that I had as we've started to build our platform. And we had some events and people that I actually didn't knew came together, and it was like immediately like a kind of a family. Like you get to know each other quite quickly. Everybody was pretty polite, and it was like a good spirit. So this is my first experience with that.
And as a culture, it's like a local culture. Was it people in your geographic region, or were they really around the world in those first experiences?
In the first experiences was pretty much from around the world. So it was depending on what event you have offered, pretty much people from the US or from Europe or from Eastern Europe or sometimes from South America or something joined. And it feels like everybody becomes quite equally there.
Yeah.
Maybe I can continue, because my first social experience was also in VR, but it was back, I think, in 2017, because I was based in LA at the time, and I was doing actually 360 production. I had a studio, and we were developing. I had a startup, and that was a pitch session for VR startups hosted in Altspace. And I was invited, and I remember that I actually woke up late. I was late for the session, and out, like in my bed, I just grabbed the headset, put it on my head. And in 5 minutes, I was in the social meeting networking. And because I was invited, it was a LA-based community. So I knew a lot of people. And for me, it was this moment of, wow, I can be still in my bed in my pajama, but I'm already in the social meeting with the people that I know, but I'm seeing them in this new reality. But at the same time, I remember feeling that it was a protected space because it was an event hosted by the company where invited people came, and it felt like a very good networking space where I could join from the comfort of my home. So that was the turning moment for me when I experienced it for the first time.
It's interesting that you say, I mean, you say your first social experience was also in VR. And that's a
Yes.
powerful statement already, because I wonder if you've had social experiences that prepared you for socializing in VR. But I
Maybe
get
a
that.
little bit, yeah. Meaning that I had VR headset on my head. I didn't join from laptop, mat, like from the screen. I jumped into VR headset.
Mm-hmm. And read more.
So my sort of first experience was actually during 2020 when I had a meeting with people for planning an incubator meeting, but COVID had hit, so we had to move it from physical to digital, and we actually tested out one of these platforms in VR. And the people that attended the meeting were from the US, from Europe, from Asia, and I had never met them in person before, but I had Zoom meetings with them. And we met on this island and were avatars, cartoonish avatars without legs. And to me, it was surprising how easy and comfortable it was to communicate and how connected we were. And I remember me and one of the guys I were collaborating with, we decided we wanted to discuss something that we didn't want the others to hear. So we jumped into the ocean to talk because we knew that the ocean would stop anyone hearing what we were saying. And it's just like I just one of the things I've been explaining to people afterwards is that that you go in and you are a cartoon basically. It has very little that feels kind of comfortable. You don't need to see people in who they really are. And although I know this is going to move us into a dangerous territory, but being digital doesn't make a difference when you start communicating and you have things to talk about. And I, of course, in this situation, I felt very safe as well.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned about the fidelity, right? The fidelity of the avatar visually, because one of the things that came out of an early workshop that we did in 2020 for people who did know each other in real life but hadn't seen each other in many years is that the moment they heard the voice, they knew who it was. And it was in Rec Room, so even more cartoonish probably than the platform I think you were in, if I can guess correctly. But hearing the voice, and I think that's also something that's a little sometimes underappreciated, is how much the quality of the audio is essential for the security and the trust and the establishment of who it is I'm speaking with. But we need good audio. So Rose and Anna, anyone who's next to share?
Well, I'm happy to share with Rose. You can go first if you wish.
No worries. Please, Anna, go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I think I'm the one in the panel maybe with the less personal experience, but I will tell you about two experiences and maybe bring in, at least in one of them, a slightly different perspective. So one of my first experience came also through VR and through our members. Our members, many of them, they have labs and they work in different sectors, like manufacturing is a sector where they work a lot. So we had already, and this was just before COVID, so probably 2019 and not 2019, many that are building environments to learn to collaborate with robots. So really, and I had the opportunity to test it, to be there, to learn how to do certain activities. So obviously, the value of these applications were mainly to train people before they were actually collaborating in the physical world with those robots. But actually it was for me a sense, this was social, but social with machines, but it gave me a good sense of opportunity of the amount of things that we can build with this environment. So that's the first part. The second part, I think it was similar to the one that Rifmar has explained. So this came when we organized a lot of events ourselves in our organization, and when COVID came, you need to find ways to replace that. And of course, the part that is like now speeches, we can do this way, right? But 50-60% of the value for the people coming to events is actually out of these conversations. It's in the exhibition, it's in the side meetings, all these kind of things. And that's the part where it was very difficult to find a solution that it was really effective. So at that time, we had the possibility to test several solutions that were more linked to the topic of virtual worlds. We never implemented any. It was a question of cost at that time, and also a bit of not maybe feeling that we were understanding it well enough to implement it quickly. But I have to say that at that time, we really, when we tested, we realized that it was also great opportunities to bring into the, let's say, these virtual events, the real social interactive aspect that otherwise is very difficult to have. The chat is not enough, right? That's my two experiences.
All right, and Rose?
Yeah, so my experience is very much within the academic world, closely working with Rigmor on many things. And like for example, I mean, what's interesting is I got into the work of looking into VR, at least for me, the ethics of it, but also the functionality of it, especially during the pandemic. You know, when we were like searching for venues more than Zoom, more than the flat screen. I've had well, okay, we did a lot of things like and maybe the early ones that we did was to look into to experiment into different platforms that can be used for education, for educational presentations, for example, how do you call this? Training nurses, training military men. I don't know, Rigmor, if you remember all of these things that we were doing. Yeah, but also simply training our PhD fellows, you know, to make presentations in VR. You know, because we were like missing really this personal feel by just doing everything in Zoom. You know, so that so I would say that those were my early experience when it comes to social VR. Now, if you ask me what my early experience in VR is generally, then I would say it has to be gaming and sports. Yeah, but maybe that's a matter that we're not very interested in. And how did I feel? So like, and I would say that how I felt really what mattered was also the functionalities of the world that I am in, or shall we call it the room. Like for example, because we were really looking into different platforms on what can best be used for educational purposes. We looked into, of course, Outspace and many others, but also included the Rec Room and see if there's anything there. And I was immediately nabbed by kids, and I was like hurrying myself to go out. That wasn't the most pleasant experience for me. While Outspace allowed for creation of worlds, etc., etc., you know, so the the experience was something like a roller coaster in the sense that I literally felt I was entering into different worlds, into different environments, depending on which platform I was using, even if the purpose was the same. That is to find something for educational purposes or research purposes.
Yeah, I mean I agree 100%. Each platform is itself a very different culture, even if you have a range of different user groups, and you might even call tribes in some of those platforms. You know, but But across those, you again, because of the aesthetics and because of the functionalities, I think it's fair to say that there are very distinctive cultures, even among platforms that might share some other, at least the purpose, the official purpose why that platform exists. But before I follow that question up, because I'd ask Sebastian, because Realm is a platform that's in a space where there are other platforms that are nominally pursuing the same type of market position, possibly, but they're again different cultures. And I may ask, but before I do that, I'd actually like to double back just to something, Rose, you said just a little bit earlier. About the first experiences you had in VR being more in sports or in exercise or entertainment, gaming, but maybe they didn't count. But I would ask, so practically with the virtual world, is it, when we talk about like the culture of a virtual world, can a virtual world have a culture if you're alone in it? If it was, and thus is it a virtual world, even if it's for a single user experience by design? Or you're just in a platform and you're alone, which is, also very much an option. So I'll throw that up just to help define a little bit when we're saying, curiously to me, looking at the age of the people here in our panel along with me, when some of you are like, oh, virtual worlds, first experiences was VR in the pandemic era, which is still not that long ago. But I wonder, well, let's define virtual world a bit more, because maybe you had virtual world experiences that are maybe you're not recognizing in the context of virtual world today, but by certain definitions, you might, they are virtual worlds, and you might have had experiences going back decades in some cases.
I think it's probably more about what you personally feel when you talk about virtual worlds, because you can't say that social media platforms are social worlds also somehow. But I think, or for me, it was using VR is not going to a virtual world. It's going to an immersion, to switch my reality for a moment and have to do a certain thing over there. Maybe gaming. I'm not the gaming type, but doing something commercial or something in there. But for me, it never felt like a virtual world. In my or in my feeling, the world is when I can meet, if I have some crowd, if I have some life there. It cannot be unpopulated, but I guess everybody has its own definition to that.
Mm-hmm. Any other
I would probably, I would probably agree, because for me, the definition of the virtual world almost requires that there are other people that I meet, because even on the social VR platform, if it's a single user experience, it is a single user experience. It's designed just for me. When I'm going into the virtual world, I am expecting to interact there with other people. I have not done a lot of gaming when I was growing up as well, so I couldn't say that. And even social gaming, when you're playing something together, it doesn't mean that you're in the same world. So this aspect of embodying and transitioning with your presence in VR, of course, it's much stronger, because you have controllers and you really feel that your body is also present in this virtual world. But I would argue, even from other devices, you are gaining agency, because you're controlling the avatar, the persona that is representing you. So it's a smaller degree of agency, but it's still the presence together with other people, which is crucial for me in the definition of the virtual world.
Mm-hmm. If I can add to that, maybe with a slightly different perspective, first just to comment that even if we have different perspectives, it's very important that we all agree eventually on what we mean by virtual world. And for me, the virtual world is a question, it's all about interoperability. Why? Because I try to mirror that with the real world, and also in between the connection of the real world and the digital world. And sometimes I want to be alone. And why not to be alone also in the virtual world if, for instance, what you want to do is just learning? But I want to have a door that communicates myself. For instance, in the real world, I want to see my friends and just go out and see my friends. If I want to shop, I just go to the shopping mall in the real world. Now we do everything virtually, but I want to do the same virtually, and I want to do it seamless. In particular, if I'm taking my body with me, so to speak, I want to make sure that I want to be alone when I want to be alone. I want to be learning. I want to be playing with others. I want to be social. And I think for me, one very strong characteristic, because at the end of the day, more than definitions, which are very important, and we need one, and that's very important for governance of the virtual worlds as well, that we have a common understanding. I think that we need some minimum understanding requirements, that we understand that the virtual world or worlds is one or is many, or is one that is composed by different pieces and applications, but we all interoperate with each other. And we will have a global governance for the whole virtual world, or will be individual governance, and you need to learn the rules of each individual room where you are. No? So I think for me, again, that's the important part of the virtual world definition. If we talk about the virtual world as a overarching kind of connected thing, the interoperability at all the levels, and not technical, but at all the levels.
All right. I mean, so Rosenriegel, you don't have to. If you don't have a particular response to that, you don't feel like everyone has to respond in a sequence or something. But could we have follow-up questions?
Sure. No, no. I just wanted to. I'm reflecting now on my experience, because then it's. I mean, I think it's. So yeah. I'm also not necessarily a gaming person until I got my first VR headset. I mean, the very first one was like really, like Oculus Go, like how dinosaur that is, right? But then the first time that I experienced playing fishing on an Oculus Go instead of cardboard, was maybe, shall we say, okay, life changing a little bit, right? And I was
For the fish, it was life changing.
It was life changing because I was literally entering into another life space, that I in fact inhabited a world distinct from my physical world.
Mm-hmm.
And usually we do that when we travel. We go to another place, and you're like, oh wow, I'm in a different environment, and I need to understand my environment, explore my environment, know a little bit more about the people. But that's also how I felt when I first entered into this fishing game in Oculus Go. And then I also started doing a little bit of exercise using of course my Quest, doing a little bit of how do you call this, saber,
Beat Saber.
Beat Saber. Okay, I mean, just to explore it a little bit, and while I do these different things also for experimental purposes, I realized that the feeling of oh wow, now I'm in a different environment. I need to know my environment. I need to somehow my lived reality becomes really different at that point that I'm using it. I mean, and of course the sense of like, oh, when I remove it, it's like, oh, I'm again in the physical world, and I need to adjust my head, right? So does it speak of different cultures? Again, maybe an anthropologist would say we should not misuse the word culture, but most definitely it's a different environment. It's a different life space, if I may call it. And I call it a life space because I kind of live in that. And maybe we call it immersion. Maybe that's the right word to use. But then I felt that the word immersion does not entirely capture what I wanted to say in terms of me seemingly in a foreign place with different set of people, trying to get to know what is expected of me, as we usually do when we are in a new place, and what I am capable of doing, or what my options are in this new space. So maybe just some thoughts.
This is very interesting. I think that it also has to do with imagination. So I can be in a different world by just reading a book. So for me, that's kind of easy. And also you want to be alone in a virtual world. The virtual world is kind of supposed to be, or my feeling of being in a virtual world is that as if it's a real world, right? Because I'm doing things, I remember things, I feel things as if it's a real experience.
You're real. Yeah, right. You're the reality. Yeah.
And that's why it's so powerful, right? Because you then can make all of these other things around, which are very different to your physical world. So, but what makes it a virtual world? And I think that Alina, she mentioned agency, and maybe that is to then make a distinction between the virtual world I am in when I read a book compared to a virtual world that I go into when I go into a VR headset, for example. And so that is this agency, but how do we then define that agency? What makes it
or measure it?
Yeah.
So I just so to transition maybe into a follow-up question, because I think it's related to, so for some people the social element is essential to this definition of a virtual world. There needs to be other people, and then we're also talking about culture. So going from virtual world, so what makes a virtual world for some is that there needs to be a multi-user element to it, but not for everyone here. But to make a virtual world European, does that require that there be other European people present in that virtual world for the virtual world to be European? If I'm European alone in a room, can I be European? Can I be in a virtual world alone, and that virtual world be European? So the transition into like what would make it, again, maybe culture is not the right word in certain contexts, but if we're going to use in a more lay sense, what would make that environment European, either technically or culturally, and how much is geography? So, one practical question leads to our definitions of what Europe is, what the definition practically is. But I'll leave that up for each person to maybe take a stab at. Sebastian, you look ready.
Yeah, for me, the big question is what makes it European is it maybe not the world itself for me, because I think Europe is such a big patchwork of different cultures, different styles of living, different architectures that you experience if you travel from one country to the other. So there's no visual thing that makes it European. To me, it would be more like I need to have the feeling, but I cannot speak for a different culture entering a European space. I just need to have the feeling that I'm there and I'm free in thinking, I'm free in moving, I can talk whatever I want, and basically a little bit of the feeling of freedom and not to be monitored by anybody or something. This would be my first impression, but not so the visual element, because I think in most spaces everybody speaks English. So because this is the most common international language, but Europe is far more than English, and and therefore I think I cannot say that there's something especially that makes it European.
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys say?
Sorry,
so everybody's ready to jump in. I like that. Everyone's already
go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, so I am the non-European here, so maybe I can somehow say when maybe I can somehow share like my experience. So in the same way as I know if I'm riding an Asian car, a European car, or an American car, not because of how it functions, but because how it feels. And here I agree with Sebastian. There's this, I think there's also somehow that sense in VR, and I'm now grappling for words, and but I think Sebastian was moving towards a very valid point. If the VR experience allows you the set of freedoms and capabilities and capacities that you experience when you are in Europe, as opposed to, for example, somewhere else in Africa or somewhere else in Asia. So I'm originally from Asia. Or, for example, the sense of safety and security, as opposed to how you feel if you're in the United States, for example, um, makes you somehow relate, because so the human mind is very plastic, and the plasticity allows us to relate one experience to another and to make that automatic connection. If me currently being in Europe gives me this feeling, gives me this sense of security, gives me this sense of I can say whatever I want, but at the same time my privacy and security is actually still being kept. Not that somebody's is spying me or using my data to use it for other purposes, such, for example, for commercial purposes. Then somehow we relate that to what we call our European experience. And I think, because we, as I said a while ago, we were experimenting on different platforms for educational purposes, and some platforms were more facilitative than others. And some platforms were more challenging than others. So then, and for some reason we we felt that the platform that was produced in Europe allowed us for the greater sense of kind of security, and we weren't like second guessing ourselves if somebody was spying on us secretly. So there's still, so it's not necessarily, I agree also with Sebastian, it's not necessarily with what colors of mix of colors they would use, though that can definitely help, of course, but it's that sense of being that which we feel when we are in Europe as opposed to being in another continent.
That's interesting, and I'll let others respond. But just to highlight, you both talked about almost verbatim, the feeling that you could say what you want to say, anything that you want to say. And it's curious because I had a similar sense that was quickly corrected from a colleague in the Netherlands who's like, no, you can't say what you want to say in public space, So I think even the practical question of that varies even from region to region, country to country, context to context in Europe, so. But what I was hearing from both of you, and I'm curious if not to hijack what others were going to say, but almost to recognize a European virtual world, do you need to have an experience of Europe to say, yes, this feels like my physical geographic experience of Europe? If someone had never been in the geographic physical boundaries of Europe, would they come to a space and say, okay, yeah, this is a European space? Or do you need to be trained in some condition to recognize? So that's just my quick response to your two, and I leave it for now the others to follow.
I would back up really and maybe build on what Sebastian and Rose are saying, because I very much agree that it's more about the feeling. And actually, preparing for this panel, I just asked myself about this. I'm trying to come to this place from a very experiential perspective once again, because immersive space is about how you feel in the space, what it translates. And I do really like the kind of example with the cars, because it delivers the same functionality, but the feel of it is very different. and that it might be connected even to the values that people who are creating that are putting into this world. So can we say that the same translates for the virtual world? Because when I ask myself a question, if I'm told that I'm coming into European virtual world, what should I expect? My expectations and my connections would be that I'm expecting respect, I'm expecting privacy, I'm expecting security, I'm expecting almost to be in control. That's very interesting because in a way, I want to control my experience in the virtual world. That comes also with the security, how much I am defining what is happening to me in my virtual world. And from that perspective, it comes to understanding that it actually can be designed, because once again, going from platform to platform, it really you can understand what the creators of the program are building into that, because how much you can limit who can enter your environment, how much you can limit what other participants are doing towards you, how much protection there is, and of course privacy in terms that I'm not being recorded, what I'm saying is not being used for any kind of other purposes. all of that comes to me with the word that I'm entering a European virtual world, and doesn't necessarily connect to other platforms which might originate in other countries. So that's kind of my at least a definition of feeling what I am expecting. It doesn't mean that it
Yeah.
happens, or but it's the expectation when I'm told about the European virtual world.
Yeah, that expectation is important. Maybe we'll get to following that up in a later question.
Maybe there's also something from, let's say, the engineering or design standpoint, because I think Europe has a very strong domain in design, for example. And in design, I don't mean necessarily crazy stuff like fashion design or so, but we have a lot of product design that was internationally absolutely known and copied all the time. We have a lot of architectural styles and so on. And I think if people from Europe or from a European brand come together and build something, they will somehow inherit some of these design aspects, for example. And maybe this is something subtle that you may recognize as European, but maybe just very subtle.
Rigmor?
So I kind of, I agree with these things, this feeling that it's important. But I also think there are two, like with everything else in life, there are genes, and then these genes can be affected by, or how you then develop can be affected by the environment you are in. And I'm kind of thinking that the design of how things look and to make it look European is, and how it's designed to work. If it's designed by European, I think it will inherently be European. But that's kind of the DNA, right? It's kind of the structure that is already there. And then it's the people that come into this space. And if people are not European, there is the likelihood that they need to get some training in what are our values. Here at home, I walk down the street. I do not have a gun on me, right? I do not wear armor. And
Okay.
I'm safe, right? And it's the same in a virtual space. I want to go into this virtual space as if I walked down the streets in my hometown, right? I want to be safe. I want to be free. So if then suddenly there are people from another culture not respecting these things, and if we then don't have a system for stopping people walking around with guns and shooting me in my virtual hometown, it will change, right? So I think there are two sides to this, that we cannot design everything. Certain things probably need to be learned or trained if people are not European. And this is probably what's very difficult in a virtual space. How do we govern all of these things? And do we have virtual police? Do we have virtual safeguards to make sure then that we maintain the virtual world according to our European values?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because the analogy then is to a physical and a sociologic example, and almost begs the question from me when I hear, are there physical regions of Europe that are not as European as other regions of Europe? Because those specific regions, whether in neighborhoods, it's kind of a touchy subject to explore almost, but it makes it, for me, that begs the follow-up question that if there are regions of physical Europe that we don't think satisfies these conditions to be ideally European, because the analogy going into virtual world from the physical offers the exact opposite. Like if this is VR chat, for example, or Rec Room, we think is not exhibiting European values because people are misbehaving. and are aggressive and harassing to me. Well, there are regions in physical Europe where that type of behavior might be an experience, and thus does it also translate back that we would then say that these are less European?
But I think once again that it's important to think that it can be kind of thought by design, because, for example, in VR chat, the only way how you are VR chat is built from the perspective of the user. So as a user, you can limit other people's behavior just by switching them off, but they're not going to disappear completely. In other, and for example, in Engage, the host of the session or the creator of the session has all the power to control other users' experience.
Well, you can do that
And
in
by
VR chat,
default,
though, right?
well, as a host, you cannot move the person. You can either just completely ban them, or you would rely on the user to do that. So, for example,
Oh,
if
yeah.
one user is harassing another user, the user who is being harassed needs to take an action to stop that.
No, you can vote
but-
them out. You can vote people out of VR chat worlds.
Kind of, once again, it's a group activity that takes some time, and usually it is not on the host, kind of on the organizer. What I'm saying is that you give the control powers that can be activated if there is a need for that, and that's how you also build those security options that can come into place if they are needed. If you don't need them, of course, no one is going to use them against just people who are safely chatting to each other, happily enjoying the company. But that's what I'm saying, that you kind of think about that and you equip people with tools for keeping this space safe, secure, and private.
Well,
If I may-
go ahead, Anna. Yeah.
Yeah, no, if I may, because we have jumped for a very important point that Rigmor commented, and I think is related to your new question, and is governance. And now, if I think about what is Europe, what is not, really what matters is that we keep certain values, but under a diversity schema. And to build this diversity, and because I think each virtual world we have slightly different rules. But at the end, we need governance, and the governance, like it has happened with AI, needs to be global. So I actually do a lot of, I see a lot of similarities in what has happened with AI and what is happening with the virtual worlds, that we focus a lot on the values and how to code European values on AI. But then in reality, the whole game is global. So we need to build global governance. And I think here is a similar story. And I don't know whether it matters whether this virtual world is a European or this is not European. We need to make sure that there is some minimum human values that integrate this dignity, this diversity, things that we want to be global, right? As a minimum thing in all the different platforms and mechanisms, etc. Then I like very much this idea of having the digital police. I don't know what, but we are going to need certain mechanisms to, and then listening to Alina and the fact that and Alina, I think you were mentioning before that you really understand a virtual world like a place where a European virtual world, like a place where you want to have your control. And I think, so yes, we need to give control to the people, but also we need to build trust. So we need to make sure that when we are in a virtual metaverse, we know what is real. I mean, what can we trust? What is invented? What data is completely invented, and what data I can really trust that really refers to, for instance, cultural heritage, or is a real piece of art that exists in the real world, something that is invented. So there are many things also about trust in the digital world that I think we should incorporate into the discussion as well, when talking about a bit the European perspective. Although still I'm struggling with the question of what is a European virtual world, and matching a lot that with the geopolitical space. But I think this I emphasize the need of this governance, of this minimum ethical values, but are different in each part of the world. This interoperability, and also this question of how we build trust in what we see, we touch, in the virtual world. What is, it's going to be a mix of invented things with real things that we can trust because they they have a provenance and we can think that they are historically correct or this kind of things. No? So I think those are also important components in this discussion.
Yeah, Rigmor?
I do not disagree that we need global virtual worlds, but I think that is going to be going for that first is going to be very difficult. So I think that what we have to do first is to contribute and help and make sure that Europe and the content and the worlds built in Europe are according to our values. And
I didn't say global virtual worlds. I said global governance of the virtual worlds.
Yeah, but I think that's equally difficult, maybe even more difficult. So I think that I think it's important that the virtual worlds that are made that are European uphold our values and that they are attractive and to users, so that for the future we also make sure that those values are upheld as people use virtual worlds more and more. And then, of course, if we can reach those goals, then we can try to spread it, of course. But I really think it's important that virtual worlds that are European are attractive and will be used. And although I shouldn't promote, maybe not Exa for Human, but I think that what we're talking about here and the code of conduct that we are going to develop is a first step. And I really hope all of you will help a lot with that as we go forward.
But,
go ahead, Rose.
Sorry, Mike. No, so I was just a lot of interesting questions, and actually the discussion is really interesting. Like, for example, when Anna said, we need to have like something like a global governance which promotes dignity and diversity and security, but these are all European values, seriously. I mean, so what in the end, maybe because we can't resist who we are, and I'm not European. And I'm saying this as a person who is observing, So, like, for example, when I was much younger and back in the Philippines and never stepped on Europe, I knew America because we were colonized by the United States. But prior to that, we were colonized by Spain. But then America's had a lot of influence in the Philippines. So then, but every time, but then they would sometimes show films that are Euro. When I watch a Euro film, I'm like, oh God, this is so strange, and I can't relate to it because it was not the video culture I was so used to. And I can imagine that this can easily be the same thing when it comes to the virtual world, isn't it? I mean, so all the things that you guys are saying, you say dignity, but diversity, but my privacy, but all of things are so European. I mean, because we can't resist who we are, and Europeans can't resist who they are. So every time we say global governance, but then it has to be governed by these, I can immediately think of a country that says no. That can say no, it shouldn't be governed by that. It should be governed by by minimal things that will allow people to do what they want to do. Mm-hmm. Right? What human dignity are we talking about? They will say that does not make any sense. Right? So these values, these are all very, very European values. And yes, of course, there will be countries in Europe that are not necessarily like the majority. I mean, but then you also have what you call the European Barometer, which tells you what are these values that the majority of Europeans actually believe in. Like, for example, solidarity. So and why are we always aiming for more education, more inclusivity? Because that's such a European value to have. And for you, it's just like, no, it has to happen that way, but not necessarily for others. And I do come from a country where those things that we mentioned here do not come in like just like that. We would say it has to be governed. No, not necessarily.
Mm-hmm. But actually, Rose, we are not saying so different things. Actually, the reason to have a global governance is to agree on these minimum things that are important for everyone. And then we can build on top of that. And I don't think I disagree with what Rigmor say. I think we need to be very competitive and very attractive European virtual worlds. Also because, as everything else, we want to create products that become global just because they are attractive and because they bring our values, etc. But I think those things are not incompatible. I think there is compatibility here. And I think, again, the global governance is meant to find what is the minimum agreement that we have and what are the minimum rules that we have. Otherwise, there won't be interoperability in between the different platforms and in between the different virtual worlds, which I think is essential. And interoperability is meant to also have rules in governance, in business, in cultural interoperability, and that somehow needs to be discussed at certain levels, right? So that's what I mean by global governance of the virtual worlds.
If I could jump in, just because of Sebastian, I wanted to direct a question to you, because Rigmor mentioned the code of conduct, which is one of the critical outputs of the XR for Human initiative, and then we were just talking about things that may be European but are innately, like intuitively, European. And I, as someone who's developing, a product that's a European platform, and are you? Talk about a little bit of code of conduct or European values that you can recognize that we're doing it this way. We know that other platforms maybe in the space don't do it that way, but we do it this way because of, X, Y, Z, and yeah.
Okay, let me first share a little bit of my view on these things. I think Europeans should be building the metaverse. We should actually really dive deep into that, because it's a huge opportunity for Europe to raise on the technical and IT level and what China and the US already have. So it's a huge business opportunity for us. But I think where we should really be very conscious about is, do we really need to over-regulate everything from our perspective? I totally agree with Anna. I would say we should have, let's say, a very minimal thing like the International Bill of Rights for metaverses or so on, because in my view is, if someone is creating a space on our platform, for example, or on Engage or whatever platform, and he's handing it over, or she's handing it over to someone from a different country, so they should be somehow the ones that should be allowed to make their own governance in there, how they want to have it, to the most freedom that we can get without becoming criminal and so on. So for me, it's a very tough thing, because I think we have to be international on that. We cannot do a European trip alone, because it's such a complicated legal thing that we're entering with the metaverse. If we just regulate, we will not succeed with the metaverse, with the global metaverse. Then we will have, or we stay with the internet we have today. I think we have to really take a look and see what is really the bare minimum that we can expect, and what are the, let's say, how we police it, how we do justice in there, and so on, that we need to define definitely in this Carta, for example. But don't be too much European, and don't try to take the European culture and invade other cultures with our way of thinking, just because we can. So this would be my perspective on that.
But maybe this is, you brought up, you gave the example of police, which had already been referenced before. But so a police that, what would they represent then? If it wasn't, if it was like a minimal police force, is that what you mean? Like there'd be a global minimum accepted behavior, or a non-accepted behaviors, and the police would be enforcing a minimal rather than some type of particular state or other type of jurisdiction?
I think you have to think a little bit broader in terms of policing. You have what's happening in the virtual space, and the virtual space currently is humans meeting humans in avatar level or hologram levels. But as soon as AI becomes powerful enough to really create NPCs that we take for granted, and we accept them as basically another life form. For example, you could have a computer-driven animal or something that you like, and this is your pet or something, or maybe even a human-like robot or so. Now I lost my point a little bit, but I think it's somehow important that we try to think not only what's happened in the space, but also what happens, or let's say what dangers maybe come from the outside. If you look on the internet today, you have cyber attacks, you have lots of trackers that try to follow you and give you advertising and so on. And I think we have to deal with this more, like having, for example, having a real identity for every participant who is going on the metaverse. Europe could give out identities and try to protect these identities for everyone in the world. It doesn't needs to be for only Europeans, for example.
Yeah, Alina?
I just wanted, to jump in also because I would have to leave soon. I do apologize because we're a bit over time. I do agree, but it's not about over-regulating, but I would maybe highlight it's about building in the tools that then can be used to provide as much security and as much privacy that can be applied if needed. That's probably a kind of my perspective at this point of time. At the same time, I do see Anna's point when talking about interoperability and one virtual world versus virtual worlds. It's a whole different other discussion, because I do not believe that we can just start the discussion that, oh, we're going to build one virtual world from scratch. We already have virtual world platforms that are emerging, and they're all separate. Most likely, my scenario is that at certain moment, technology would allow us to jump seamlessly in between. That's already happening. But that's the reality right now. We don't have one virtual world that is completely interoperable. Maybe we will have in the future, but that's, for me, a unrealistic scenario in the close perspective. But I do agree that we're entering the point of time where it would be very important for our security to also identify with whom we are in this virtual world, because AI and NPCs are coming very quickly. And I've had a lot of very fun interactions when we were hosting large events in Engage, where people are coming to the virtual world for the first time. For example, at some expo, they're just given the headset, they come to the world, they don't know what to expect. And there are, like my team, for example, supporting the event. And the first question, are you real? Like, are you real people? Am I actually talking to a real person? And the answer is yes, you are talking to a real person, and we're based there. And that's already a very big sensation and a game-changing moment for a lot of people. This first virtual interaction with the avatar looking human that is an actual human. Very soon we would need some type of verification that, am I talking to a human, or am I talking to a voice generated AI that is acting as a certain human? And kind of that's the first check mark that we already need to start thinking to verify actual humans. And from there we just go. But I agree that we cannot regulate everything, but we, from the European perspective, can think about the tools that would help to bring those values into the virtual worlds.
Yeah. And conscious of time, I'd like to now turn this over to everyone to have maybe like a final word. I don't know, Alina, you just spoke, but if before you go, if there's some last things to kind of wrap up your points or your positions around what we've discussed.
No, I think that thank you for the discussion. It's a lot of very interesting points that I will definitely reflect inside the virtual worlds when we hopefully also meet in there to have practical interactions as avatars. Thank you.
All right. Final thoughts?
Maybe from my side, as I also have to leave, thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to the code of conduct of XR for Human. I think it's a very important part. We didn't elaborate much on the code of conducts, but those are needed. I'm really looking forward to it. And even when I'm still a strong believer that eventually we need to build this interoperability, yeah, I still also very much support this building this let's say this European virtual worlds, and with many of the components that we discussed, with this openness, transparency, inclusivity, and ethical. And even we didn't talk about this environmental responsible aspect of the virtual worlds. So I'm really looking forward to the strong collaboration between XR for Human and Openverse in this direction still, even when today I went a bit global with the discussion. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think what I actually like, and this is, for example, for XR for Europe, this is a good example, bringing all the Europeans to a table and make them talk to each other, because we are currently in an emerging market. Everybody is somehow competition, but still we have to build the greater thing together, I think. And therefore it's good to go deeper in conversations and find more ways that we meet each other, communicate, and find a common ground to make all that possible.
And Rigmor?
I agree. I think it's really important that we meet across countries in Europe. I think there are many different cultures, although these values, I think, define us, and they are important to us to bring into virtual worlds. And I was thinking, why would we want one virtual world when we can build as many as we want? That's the magic of digital technology, and so I think that fostering the possibility to have several virtual worlds, and that some of them really work hard to be European in terms of these values, I think is really, really important. So thank you very much for inviting me along for this discussion. And I look forward to working with everybody in the future. Thank you.
And Rose, last.
I've learned a lot, and it was a very interesting discussion we had today. Thank you for this, Michael. And I simply wanted to say that I think we should continue discussing this whole issue of governance, because the governance of a virtual world is not in any way, it is so complicated that it's not something that we can compare with just the governance of physical realities. We bring in, of course, European values. We bring in a lot of ethics. We bring in a lot of assumptions also in the discussions of governance. And this is, so I don't know, Michael, maybe for another topic, the whole issue of VR governance might be very interesting. And yes, this is also something that we're grappling with, the whole issue of interoperability, the whole issue of risks, etc., in XR for Human, as some of you probably know. Yeah, and so the whole issue of governance is not as simple, but also a very exciting field to be in.
Well, yeah, we're certainly not lacking for conversation topics, which might be a good reference to the XR for Human forum, which exists for the purpose of collecting and facilitating some of those topics to be discussed asynchronously, so you don't have to align with a panel discussion or something like this. And we actually have some questions that came through in the chat, but our conversation was going kind of full stop that we didn't get to those questions. But those are questions that I think, with the permission of those who, well, I guess, how are they going to give me permission? I will take those conversations, which are there in the comments, into the XR for Human forum, which we'll also link later in the comments. And if you would like to further that discussion. I think some of our panelists will probably be open to responding to them there, and anyone else who wants to join the forum can do so. But just conscious of time, we've gone a little over. I want to end it all here for now, but there is more to talk about, and I think we'll try to set up another similar type of conversation in addition to the XR for Human Forum, where this conversation will also take hold. So with that, I'd like to thank all of our speakers who were here today, particularly Rose and Rigmor and Sebastian, who stayed until the end, but also Alina and Anna, who had to leave at the proper time. So thank you very much, everyone. And thank you those for tuning in and those who are going to watch this later as well. As in, again, this will be residing on LinkedIn and on YouTube. So if you have friends or colleagues or someone that you want to be exposed to the viewpoints and the perspective shared, please feel free to share those links, which will also be up for quite a while. So thank you, everyone, and have a very good rest of your week.
Thank you.